Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, please take your seats now. If you can't find a chair, additional space is available on the first floor tribunes.
Hello, good morning again, everybody. Wow, welcome back. I thought we had a full room yesterday, but today it's really packed. And that's good news, because we're going to have a full show, full of discussions with party leaders, prime ministers, commissioners, and last but not least, also an important speech. Because we want to thank today again our host SPD, and in particular the German Chancellor, now since he's here with us, Olaf Scholz.
Liebe Genossinnen und Genossen, compañeras y compañeros, compagne e compagni, amici, comrades, friends. This is the second day of our Congress. Yesterday, it was an important moment for our organizations. We elected a new leadership. We elected a new president, Stefan Levin. And the very first thing that Stefan did was to call for a presidency meeting and make a proposal for his team that will accompany him in leading the Party of European Socialists until the next Congress. So allow me to welcome and show to you this inclusive, representative, powerful team that will lead our movement in the near future. And I will begin by inviting on stage Irache Garcia Perez, our first Vice President.
And then I would like to welcome on stage our Treasurer, Caroline Genet.
And this will be followed by our Executive Vice President, Caterina Barley.
And we have a second Executive Vice President, Francisco André.
And our Vice President from Slovenia, Tanja Fajon.
And Vice President Victor Negrescu.
And Kati Piri from the Netherlands, PvdA.
And Andrei Shenya.
And Radmila Shekerinska from North Macedonia. And after the Vice Presidents, we go to our Secretary General, Achim Post.
And then I would like to welcome our Executive Secretary General, Giacomo Filibeck.
And our Deputy Secretary General, Saar van Buren.
And last but not least, our other Deputy Secretary General, Jonnek Pollet.
And as we said, on top of everything is the President, Stefan Levin. Get close. So this is the real photo op of the day. Alles good? Thomas Baupel is giving us the sign of keep going. Keep going. You know, maybe you don't know, but Thomas Baupel is the real mastermind of everything here.
Yeah.
Yes, an applause to Thomas Baupel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Stefan, you can stay.
So, to kick off our program, we start with the speech, of course, of the new president of the Party of European Socialists and Democrats, Stefan Levin.
Thank you so much, and dear leaders, dear prime ministers, delegates, friends. Once again, thank you so much for the trust that you have placed in me. It's an honor to be elected president also 30 years after we were founded. And to be that in Berlin, in Germany, also under the hosting of a German social democratic chancellor, is something special. Friends, I believe that in times of crisis, it becomes even more obvious for more people that the answer to our great political challenges is the social democratic ideas of equality, solidarity, and community. No one is strong on their own. We social democrats, we know that, and we've known that for a long time. But I think it has become obvious for more people also today to realize that we as human beings, we need one another. That equality and solidarity are not only fine principles, they are actually the prerequisite for free and strong individuals who can create strong societies. Just look at the OECD and the International Monetary Fund. In the past, these organizations were the main defenders of neoliberalism. Now, they also understand that equality and growth are not in opposition to each other. On the contrary, equality and growth are each other's prerequisites. At the same time, populists and right-wing extremism are growing in Europe, which pits group against group. They add to anxiety and to division. They want to dismantle democracy. They threaten human dignity. It's so easy, always easier, to play on fear. That and to provide simple answers to difficult questions is the only game for populists and extremists. They deny the climate crisis we're in, they blame everything on immigration, and they say that democracy has reached its time. So friends, it is a frightening development we see in the world around us. And the history of Europe teaches us with brutal clarity what happens when democracy and human dignity are curtailed. The labor movement has always been right-wing extremists' main adversary. So are we now. We see what is happening in countries such as Hungary and Poland. Democracy and the rule of law are gradually being dismantled. Gradually, women's rights are restricted. Gradually, the equal value of all people is threatened. We see what is happening in Italy and unfortunately also in my home country, Sweden. Parties with roots straight down in the fascist and neo-Nazi past have now reached the ultimate political power. And therefore my message is, defending democracy and human dignity will be one of our main tasks as social democrats in these coming years. We have, and we will always be clear, it is thanks to our political family that the EU today is committed to defend the rule of law and democracy, and there must be clear consequences for those countries, member states, that violate these European values. And we must never be naive. Far too often conservatives neither want to or are able to take on these right-wing extremists. So once again, it is us Social Democrats, together with genuinely liberal forces and Green parties, on whom this responsibility falls. Democracy must not be abolished from within. Trumpism must never be allowed to gain a foothold in our Europe. And it's also a matter of gender equality. As the right-wing conservatives gain power, women's rights, conditions, participation deteriorate. The fight for women's rights is a fight for human rights, but also our fight as men for a gender-equal society. So equality must always be on the top of our political agenda. And I praise women and their role in ensuring that we do have an EU gender equality strategy. Now, ratification of the Istanbul Convention is a must. Right to abortion must be part of the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights. And gender-based violence must be eradicated. And as a feminist, it is obvious to me that equality, gender equality, is both an ideological and moral issue, but it's also a question of making use of everyone's potential. So all women and men must have the same opportunities and obligations in our Europe. Now, friends, a new dark chapter in Europe's history is being written right now. Vladimir Putin and the Russian political leadership and the war against Ukraine is despicable and reprehensible. They bear the direct responsibility for this war, and thus for the war crime, for the attacks on children and civilians in Ukraine. And Russia's illegal war is not only an attack on Ukraine, but it's also an attack on our fundamental values. It threatens peace and security all over Europe and the world. Ukraine being invaded by a foreign power, Russia, because they want to exercise their right to freely and democratically choose their own path, because they want to live in an open and democratic society. So our message is clear also here. We stand united in the fight for Ukraine's right to live in peace, security, and democracy. And we do that because there is no alternative. Because if international law is not enforced, then lawlessness prevails. And then we can start asking what happens next. Who are the cannons aimed at next time? So here and now, continued support for Ukraine is needed. It has been and is still very crucial that the European Union is united. Olaf Scholz and Germany have taken unique decisions that strengthen the EU's overall defense capability. Sanna Marin in Finland, Magdalena Andersson in Sweden, the decision in this very new security environment to take Sweden and Finland into NATO strengthens the security of the whole of Europe. That Josep Borrell, through the European Peace Facility, strengthens the EU ability to act, contribute to peace, and strengthen international law. we will need to do more to strengthen Europe and to protect our citizens, to face irrational aggression, and to continue to stand by Ukraine through concrete armed support to defend itself. Now the tensions are high again, and the threat of nuclear weapons frightens the whole world. It becomes clear again that the world must strive for common security. The need for global cooperation becomes even more clear. And I'm so glad that I've, together with Pedro Sánchez, been working with a global network to support the United Nations and to combine all the good forces. Thank you, Pedro, for that cooperation. So peace, dear friends, peace will always be our overarching objective. It is with democracy, international law, and human rights that we build a long-term sustainable peace. Friends, migration is another great challenges of our time. Let me start by saying that diversity enriches communities. But we also know that when integration does not work, the gaps in our societies risk increasing. There must always be a balance to ensure a successful integration and thus participation in the society. This, in turn, requires that the whole of Europe must take responsibility and shared joint responsibility. This is my clear experience from the refugee crisis in 2015. The right to asylum must be always protected. I would like to congratulate Ylva Johansson for successful work on the road to a common pact on migration and asylum. And we all know that the picture that we have seen from Syria, from the Mediterranean Sea, and from Ukraine makes it so clear. It is a matter of solidarity, but also responsibility. And as always, it is required that we Social Democrats lead the way, that we dare to take the tough decisions and stand up for our values. Friends, our family has been a driving force behind the European enlargement. It is gratifying that Moldova and Ukraine have been given a candidate status and that Georgia is aspiring. A clear commitment to the Western Balkan process must be followed by act. At the same time, it's important that every step of the enlargement process builds democratic institutions, because that is how we strengthen the rule of law and how we fight corruption. But bringing Europe together is about giving more people the opportunity for a better future, and also about strengthening Europe's security and sovereignty. We must also be aware of that Europe's security is based on the surrounding world. So therefore, we must build common security with other regions, with other countries. Europe is once again at a historic moment. We, Social Democrats, we take responsibility for peace and security, for international law to prevail, and for a better future for everyone. Around the world, young people gather in climate demonstrations. And they, rightly so, demand that we politicians do more. It is their future that is at stake. The time for us that we have to reduce the emissions to reach the goal of 1.5 degrees is shrinking. But it has to be done. No question mark. It has to be done. This is our duty to the youth and the future generations. And I would like to change the narrative somehow about climate transition, because right now, for example, in the north of Sweden, we are witnessing a green industrial revolution that is creating 10,000 of new jobs. And at the same time, emissions are reduced. Places that people previously moved from are now building homes, schools, cultural centers at a speedy pace. Climate transition should not be a burden for the individual to bear on itself. This is a collective endeavor, because climate transition is now the major societal development of our time. And we Social Democrats can show that climate transition will be both about saving our planet, but also improving the living conditions for everybody. And if we do this right, my friend, the most vulnerable in our societies will benefit the most, because we will have clean cities, warm houses, healthy food, and new jobs. And it's not only in the northern parts of Sweden that things are happening. The sustainable shift is going quite fast now. The energy crisis in itself is accelerating the necessary changes. That we must shape a fossil-free society and reach carbon neutrality by the latest 2050. And we Social Democrats also have a clear picture of how this is to be done. A European Green Deal with a strong social dimension is our priority. There are many to thank for this, not least Frans Timmermans, for having set high ambitions. Now clear financial mechanisms to drive the transitions are necessary to provide everyone with the conditions to take part in these tremendous opportunities, and no one can be left behind. A European Pact for Affordable Energy and Social Cohesion is urgent, so that our citizens can manage the winter. We need a European solution to lower the energy bills for both people and businesses, not least the small businesses. And in the end, through cheap fossil-free energy, we will wrestle the energy weapon out of Putin's hand. That, my friends, is a win-win situation that requires social democratic leadership. Friends, the fight for jobs is a fight against discouragement. The fight for jobs is a fight for equality, for individual freedom, and against individual guilt, and also the possibility to build welfare. And this is a struggle that we Social Democrats have always led. But in an economic crisis, people's security is often torn apart. I know, not least from my time in the trade union movement, that when crises strike, it is the jobs and homes of ordinary workers that is hit the hardest. It is often those who work hard, do their part, who also have to bear the heaviest burden in bad times. Having a job to go to is also one of the most important gender equality issues. And to be a social democrat is to be a feminist. And as a feminist movement, we fight for the women to have the same rights to freedom and security a job really entails. And PES, for me, is also synonymous with more and better jobs. The European Union has created jobs throughout our union, but the conditions differ. Getting a fair wage for work is a fundamental right. In the Nordic labour market model, that has been made possible through negotiations and collective agreements. Elsewhere, it is politically decided minimum wages that set the standard. I want to congratulate Nicola Schmidt on a job well done. Guaranteeing minimum wages is a success for large parts of Europe, and at the same time, it must never lead to worse conditions elsewhere. We must continue showing solidarity with each other and ensuring that wages and conditions are constantly improving across the European continent. And now the directive on platform work that strengthens workers' rights is long awaited, touching millions of people, and one of the most important issues in the near future, not least for us as the parties that represent workers. And now, friends, it was with pride that we laid the foundation for the social pillar during the Gothenburg summit. And the social summit in Portugal, under Antonio Costa's leadership, took the next steps and was important in providing continued momentum. And when the time comes for the next treaty, the overarching issue is to bring in social progress protocol that will give us the social Europe that our citizens actually are asking for. And our youth. The European Youth Guarantee has given young people hope, greater opportunities for jobs and a faith in the future. The European Child Guarantee would curb child poverty and give children the security they need. These are signature proposals from us as a political family. They show whose side we are on. It shows that who matters actually, who rules matters, and what could be more important for us than children and young people's safety and faith in the future. So friends, as I said, we live in troubled times. But we must never, ever let hopelessness overcome the belief that a better future is possible. We are driven by the conviction that the future is ours to shape. PES must be the force that shows that no political challenge is too big for us to solve together. Friends, it's a true honor to be part of this movement, and I look forward to leading, together with you, the political force that takes the fight for democracy, human dignity, peace, and climate. Thank you for your trust. Thank you.
They are going to be fast.
Thank you, Stefan. Thank you, Stefan. With that speech, we open today really Met Moed voor Europa, with Cards for Europe. And in that spirit, we move on to our next panel. Actually, the first one of today.
The next panel is Leading Europe Through Change. And indeed, we live in times of change. We may say, in a formula, in a nutshell, that the tragic decision of invading Ukraine by Vladimir Putin has changed everything. But for sure, it has changed the everyday life of the Ukrainians, transforming it into a nightmare of violence and suppression and aggression. For the rest of Europe, it has changed a big part of our certainties, our comfort, you may say. The idea that we were living in security, the idea that we were having energy supply always available. And to a certain extent, it has even put under threat our own concept and our own system of democracy. These challenges are not easy to be faced, but we can count on a group of leaders that have been showing their values, their power, their capacity in turbulent times like the pandemics in this past couple of years, and that now are showing relentlessly solidarity with the Ukrainian people, making sure that Europe is united facing this war of aggression. We are talking about our prime ministers that sit in the European Council and that makes the difference for millions of European citizens. And we are very grateful for the job that you do.
We are. And actually, we want to welcome you. And Congress, please give them a warm applause. We welcome you on stage. Prime Minister of Spain, Pedro Sánchez. Prime Minister of Sweden, Magdalena Andersson. Prime Minister of Portugal, Antonio Costa. Prime Minister of Malta, Robert Abela.
Or I can stay here and... Dear Magdalena, I turn first to you for the first question. Under your leadership, there has been a new departure for Sweden defense cooperation with the rest of Europe. What are the implications for Europe and for Sweden of Russia's illegal war in Ukraine and the hostile rhetoric towards the West?
Well, Russia's illegal invasion of their friendly and democratic neighboring state of Ukraine changed everything. This was an aggression. It is illegal and it's undefendable. And therefore, the united response that we've had in Europe has been incredibly important. And I'm so proud of the decisions taken, both when it comes to sanctioning Russia, when it comes to supporting Ukraine, but of course also through strengthening the European Union and Europe as such. And I think the most important issue here is to continue. We need to continue our unity. We need to keep sanctioning Russia, and we need to keep supporting Ukraine as long as it is necessary, because we cannot let Russia win this war. This is an existential question for Europe. Because what would be with us? I mean, how could we explain if we would let Russia win this war? From Sweden and Finland, of course, this also fundamentally changed how we see upon our security and the security in the Baltic region. With long and deep discussions between me and Sanna Marin, the Prime Minister in Finland, we both countries decided to send in an application to NATO. And of course, this was a difficult discussion in our countries and of course also within our parties. But this was the right decision, and I'm very grateful to all of you for all the support that we have gotten from EU, NATO countries, European NATO countries, and the very quick ratification process. So thank you all so much for all the support.
Pedro, welcome as well. How important is it that we keep behind the Ukrainian people in the face of Russian aggression?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really, really important, as Magdalena said, for the future of Europe and an international order based on rules. We have over 140,000 refugees coming from Ukraine in Spain. It's quite a large distance between Ukraine and Spain, but we are the fifth country receiving and hosting these refugees. And it's quite clear who is the aggressor and who is suffering the aggression. And we are with the people that are suffering the aggression, who are, of course, the refugees of Ukraine. So, you know, we have to keep that unity. As Madalena said, I think it's important to provide financial support, humanitarian aid, and of course, military capabilities for the Ukrainians. I think it's also a challenge for the European Union as a whole, because we have to, we cannot be naive. This is a challenge that Putin is also tabling against a democratic system that represents all of us, a common political project, which is the European Union. But having said this, I think it's also very important to send a clear message to the Russian population. We don't have anything against the Russian population. We have everything against the autocratic regime and Putin leadership. So, and then of course I think it's important. To take into consideration two other dimensions of this crisis. The first one is the domestic side. I think it's important to provide European responses to all this mess, this energy crisis and inflation, and to provide answers to the international community, especially Africa, Asia, and Latin American countries, which are suffering also the consequences of this war, and trying to avoid that the economic sanctions that we are, delivering against Putin and his regime hurt the economic possibilities and economic development of these countries. I think it's important that we keep in mind that the world is big. We are an important part of the world and in the international community, but we have many other regions that are suffering the consequences of this war, and they are willing to help us in I would say, in defending the international order based on rules.
Thank you.
Dear Antonio, the European Union has just granted the candidate status to Ukraine and Moldova. Is the European Union really ready to welcome these new countries among its membership?
Well, first of all, Putin cannot win this war, and we keep supporting Ukraine on a humanitarian basis, financial basis, and military basis. Peace must prevail, and we need stand for international law. We need also give full support to Antonio Guterres and United Nations efforts to solve the food crisis. We cannot forget that Africa, Latin America, all the world are suffering with this war, and we need to stand also on solidarity with all our friends in the world. Of course, Ukraine, like Moldova, Georgia, the Western Balkans, are members of our European family. And we need to take very seriously the enlargement process. That we cannot frustrate the high expectations that this enlargement creates in these countries. If we don't take very seriously this process, we will suffer the backlash in the future of the frustration of these expectations. That's what it means. First of all of the candidate states need to make a great effort to reform their institutions. But the European Union need also reform our own institutions. Let me be clear. With our current rules, we are not fit to welcome these new member states. And if we want to be serious and consequent in our invitation to come to our own, we need to have strong European pillars to host these new members in our family, and they are very welcome.
Robert, welcome on stage too. So after leading Malta through the pandemic, your party was reconfirmed in March as the largest political force this year. Congratulations still. How have you managed to keep the trust of the voters?
I believe by delivering on the expectations of people and pushing through change and reforms with resolve. And we took over in January 2020, so the same party was in government, but we had a change in the leadership of the party. And there was a particular background. As probably all of you know, we had an unfortunate and sad episode in 2017 in Malta, which concerned the death of a journalist. And that episode gave rise to the need of a number of reforms. So reforms definitely related to the rule of law principles. So in 2020, the beginning of 2020, we embarked on a process, on a tough process, and meaningful reforms are definitely tough. So there is no other solution if you want to really make meaningful reforms other than to go through a tough process. So we embarked on a process where we changed the method of appointment of the police commissioner, the method of appointment of the judiciary, by ensuring that the executive, so the government arm, was totally detached from the method of appointment and scrutiny of the judiciary. We strengthened the permanent commission against corruption, and we did a plethora of other reforms. At that time, many people doubted us. Many people doubted whether we had the resolve to push those reforms through. And I think that the result of those reforms was delivered yesterday in Malta. Yesterday, we had a very important judgment where two people who were accused of the homicide of journalist Daphne Caruana Galizia were found guilty following their admission, condemned to 40 years imprisonment each. That follows another judgment where a third person was found guilty also of this murder. A further 3 people now await trial, and we have shown that when you do really make meaningful changes, meaningful reforms, then results will follow. And I think that the second point where people really trusted us, and which led to us getting such a strong mandate way back on the 26th of March of this year, was that our approach throughout the pandemic, so throughout this process of making reforms, then 2 months after starting this process, we were faced with the pandemic. So in March of 2020, Malta, which is very much dependent on the tourism economy, a third of our economy is dependent on the touristic sector, we had to literally close off our airport. So that meant the death toll to a third of the income of our economy. But we had to take those decisions to protect the health of our people. Contemporaneously, we took strategic decisions to support the income, the livelihoods of our people, and to support businesses. And we took a decision to issue a wage supplement, a minimum of 800 euros every month in the salary of our workers were guaranteed and paid by government. And we stood by our people throughout the pandemic. We stood by our businesses, we supported them by keeping electricity prices stable, fuel prices stable, issuing this wage supplement, which I just mentioned, postponement of the collection of taxes, among a number of other measures which we introduced to keep our economy moving forward. And we took that same approach in the earlier months of this year, both prior to the election and also after, when disaster literally struck following the war between Russia and Ukraine. There again, we took a very strategic decision to support totally the increase in electricity and fuel bills, meaning that government absorbed the increase in prices totally, both as regards electricity, as regards fuel, and as regards the liquefied natural gas. And I believe that support which we gave to our people made people convinced that we were the right administration to lead them forward. And I would tie up this issue to what is going to happen in the coming months. Let us not underestimate the importance of keeping the support of people behind us. If we lose that support, we risk the rise of populist movements. Not we risk, we're seeing the rise of populist movements. We're seeing the rise of right movements. So let us be very careful there. Let us not underestimate the importance of continually supporting our people. If people feel the economic pinch, and they are feeling the economic pinch related to the rise of inflation, to the inflationary costs related to food, related to energy, if people feel that they are being punished for something which definitely they do not share the blame for, then we risk losing their support. And the last point which I would like to make is, and I will definitely conclude on this point, is the importance of continuously bringing about change. So yes, right now we're focused on the war between Russia and Ukraine. We're focused on the energy prices. We're focused on tackling food insecurity. But there are also other themes and topics which touch the everyday lives of people. So whether we're talking about civil liberties, whether we're talking about health, whether we're talking about education. We just listened to the speech by Stefan. He mentioned the change or the sector of platform workers. This week, we made meaningful reforms in this important sector. And there we were faced also with an issue of principle in Malta. Our platform workers are all third country nationals, or mostly third-party nationals, almost 100% of them. So we could have turned a blind eye to the realities which these people are living through, or we could have reformed the sector. And we turned back to our principles, to our principle of social conscience, and there we decided to implement reforms which are being driven through right as we speak. Same as regards the child guarantee, which Stefan mentioned this week. We introduced further reforms to protect the most vulnerable of our families. Let us realize that investing in a solid, in a robust child guarantee will mean that we will have solid future generations. So the issue all lies about the courage to always bring about reforms, notwithstanding the challenges. Yes, we are crisis leaders, there is no doubt about that. Our tenure is perhaps one of the most difficult that history has experienced, but the courage to bring about further reforms and changes, be it in the rule of law, be it in all other areas, will definitely define the future of Europe. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Dear Magdalena, you have led your party to score the first in the last Swedish elections with more than 30%, and I think that this should be acknowledged by everybody as an amazing success. Unfortunately, the coalition you have been part of falls a bit short in respect to the opposing camp. The opposing camp saw the rise of far-right populist movement. What would be the priority of your party under your leadership to counteract this rise of far-right populism?
Thank you so much. I think it's important to say, I mean, we did a good election. We increased 2 percentage points, and we will be governing more in the more municipalities and more regions than we did before. But since the Conservative Party, the Christian Democratic Party, and well, now we have to say so-called Liberal Party, decided to cooperate with the Sweden Democrats rather than with us, this is a situation that we lost power on national level. Just say a few words about the Sweden Democrats. It's definitely a far-right party. It was created by neo-Nazis in Sweden, so it has deep neo-Nazi roots, but I mean, it's still a party with very questionable policies. For instance, their party leader, the week before the war, he was in a TV show asked if he preferred President Biden or President Putin. He couldn't choose. We have their party secretary. He was a teacher, but he was twice expelled as a school teacher because he was too radical anti-Islamist or anti-Muslim. He will now be leading the parliament's judiciary committee. We have one of their leaders who has been very vocal that Swedes with a Jewish background cannot be real Swedes. He will now lead the Swedish OSCE delegation. This is what's happening in Sweden right now. this party got 20% in the election. And I think it's very important to say, it's not like 20% of the Swedes do have these values. There are lots of good people that should be voting for us that are voting for this party now. So we have a homework that we have to do. And looking at this party, I think we have to think a lot, and Nicoletta and I have been speaking, we also have to learn from each other. I think this is the discussion we have to have within PES. What is the best way to fight these parties? But I can say with the Sweden Democrat, number one, they did a very good election campaign. They have many very devoted party members that are spending a lot of time campaigning for their party. They're very strong in social media, much, much stronger than we are in social media. It's also the fact that the traditional right, they have been spending the last 4 years to legitimize this party, to normalize them, to really say this is a party like others. But just as I told you, they are definitely not. But this is, I think, the conviction among many Swedish voters is that this is just a party like others, and this is also what the traditional Swedish media is picturing them as. Then, of course, we do have the issue of migration. This is their number one issue. And Sweden have taken more refugees, did during the crisis 2015, more refugees than any more developed country had done before. And this, of course, is something that is still part of the discussion in Sweden when we are seeing the consequences in Sweden of that. And then on top of that, we know that they have more male voters than female voters. We know that those that vote for Sweden Democrats, they don't see a bright future for themselves, and they don't feel trust to society. And we have to ask ourselves, why are there so many men that feel this way in Sweden and also in other countries? The Sweden Democrats, they gained in almost all cities in Sweden. So all over the country, they have increased their votes. So this is something we have to analyze, right? And I think it's one of the really fundamental issues for my party in Italy, but I guess for others as well. Why don't people feel trust in society? Why don't they feel that there is a better future for them? And we have to do our homework to make sure that we can tell the story and have the right policy so that people can feel that politics, social democratic politics, we do have the answer for the problems that they are seeing right now. And we do have it. I mean, it's really people, citizens in Europe, they're asking for more policies. They are asking for more social democratic policies, but we have to be more vocal, at least I have to say. I have to be more vocal, and Swedish Social Democrats have to be more vocal to explain that, yes, we do have the answers to the problems that you see in your everyday life.
Thank you, Magdalena. Thank you for those lessons learned, and thank you for the self-reflection as well. I think we can really learn from this in the coming years. Antonio, yesterday and today we heard the climate emergency mentioned many times, of course, as one of the first priorities of our progressive movement. Has the ongoing war in Ukraine jeopardized our commitment?
No, on the contrary. I think the current situation is a wake-up call for everybody to accelerate the energetic transition. If we want to become free for fuel dependence from Russia, we need to invest more on renewables, sun, wind, hydro, and in the future, green hydrogen and other renewable gases. This is the future. And we need a full-fledged union of energy. And that means we need to build interconnections between all our member states to can share the best energy you produce and afford everybody with the energy that we need. And we can never forget, if we want to win on this energy transition, we need to have the support of our people. If we want to avoid to fool the populists, we need to tackle the price of energy. And that is urgent if you want not to lose the people and to win this battle to energy transition to fight climate change. This is the time to do this.
Antonio already touched on this topic, but Pedro, yourself, together with Antonio, you have took the lead to initiate the reform of this dysfunctional energy market. So what are the lessons that also the rest of Europe can learn from your experience?
Well, I think that the main lesson would be that we need to intervene in the market, which is not functioning at all. Having said this, I do believe that there are different concepts. The first one is reform. I think that we need to align our responses to this energy crisis together with the other bigger crisis, which is the climate crisis. That is why in my country it's important what we are developing, which is all the green transition. And we are not using this crisis as an excuse to postpone our goals and commitments regarding the green transition. Of course, I think, and I plead the Commission, I would do it again in the Council as many others, Socialists, but I think it's important to reform the market and to decouple the gas prices from the electricity prices. This is something that we need to face and do it as soon as possible. So first, reforms aligned with the other crisis, which is the climate crisis. Second, protection, social protections to middle-income households and, of course, the most vulnerable. This is what we are doing. I think it's important to face a European solution also for our enterprises, industries, and of course, families. In this regard, I think what we did together with the Portuguese comrades, it is, it has positive outcomes. Just to put on the table some figures, some numbers, we already saved for the Spanish consumers more than 2.6 billion euros with this intervention of the gas that generates electricity in the Iberian Peninsula. The third concept, in my opinion, apart from reforms, protection, would be solidarity, as Antonio has mentioned, which means that the Iberian Peninsula is not interconnected at all with the European grid. And just to say in a number, in Spain, for instance, we concentrate 1/3 of the total regasification capacity of whole Europe. So if we want to be solidar, and we want to, with other countries that are much more vulnerable to this, hybrid war, using energy, as Antonio said, by Putin against the European economy and the European industry, I think it's important to provide those alternatives, speeding up the interconnections from the Iberian Peninsula with the rest of the European Union. And one last word is that in every crisis, there are some big companies that win a lot of money. And we need to tax them for these extraordinary profits. And this is what we are doing in Spain, and of course we are asking to do so in Europe.
Robert, very big question, maybe.
I'll try to compress
Try
that.
to open. So, what further changes do you see ahead for Europe?
I think it all depends on how we tackle the current issues, be it the war between Russia and Ukraine. So that is where I believe we have a point of diversion or divergence in how we are seeing things. A number of countries are seeing things. We all agree that we must keep fully supporting Ukraine. There is no doubt that on that point of principle. But last week we were in Prague, and I did not even listen or hear the word peace even once. Luckily today, in our earlier discussions, this theme has been touched upon. But are we really pushing forward for more meaningful peace talks? Are meaningful peace talks compatible with insisting of a win on one side or the other. Those are two questions which I think need to be addressed. So, we definitely do not want Russia to win this war. No doubt about that. But will we ever bring an end to this if we do not engage in meaningful peace talks? And I do believe that the potential for peace talks always remains. Malta has been advocating the theme for peace for a number of months now, not just in the issue of the war between Russia and Ukraine, but also on a more general theme. So I'm just giving this as a food for thought. Let's keep discussing on this issue. The second point, which will, I think, shape the future of Europe, is how we tackle other important matters. The theme of migration was very rightly addressed by Magdalena. It is a very pressing issue for a number of countries, be it Sweden, be it Greece, be it Malta. We have different routes of our migration issues, and by routes I'm not just referring to the migratory flows, but also to the causes. So in the case of Malta, our main source of migratory flows is that definitely in our southern borders, and it is Libya. And we have been putting forward the issue of Libya on the agenda now for a number of years. And unfortunately, I cannot really say that the principle of solidarity has been ever applied. Italy and Malta have been left to fend on their own. Let us also understand now that there is a change in the Italian government, which could also lead to a shift in the policy relating to migration, which could affect each and every one of us. Malta has been advocating very much on the issue of solidarity. Sweden have taken disproportionate burdens, so has Malta in these last years. And the only solution which we have been advocating for, as Beppe knows, Commissioner Johansson was here earlier, the issue that we have to tackle the problems on the ground, at source, on the Libyan shores. And going back now and tying these two issues, the issue of the war in Ukraine and the issue of Libya, they are two separate issues, but can also be seen to be intertwined. Yesterday we have all read about the atrocities in the Ukraine, the mass rapes which have been experienced. But let's also understand that people in Libya are dying each and every day. Migrants are being lost at sea. Children are being lost at sea. We had an episode, a heartbreaking episode, a few days ago, where a 4-year-old child died of thirst when crossing between Libya and Greece. And the issue resolved into one as to which country was to take the blame for not intervening. Let us not underestimate these humanitarian issues. That is what we are experiencing each and every day, what we have been seeing these last years. So let us not underestimate the issue of Libya. The last point, and this was very well addressed also by Antonio, the issue of turning the energy crisis into an opportunity. Taking the case of Malta, we have a lot of wind, we have a lot of sun, people travel to Malta to enjoy the sun, but we have only 11% of our energy needs which are being generated by renewable sources. So that is something which everyone agrees that is rather strange. We have the sea, and we have not exploited the resource of the sea over the last years. So this current energy crisis has left us with no other alternative but to push forward and seek solutions. The other issue is that we are limited in land space. So being a small island of 500,000 people, the land space is what it is. So it is not just a simple question of installing more solar panels. There is no space to install wind farms, no space to install wind turbines. So the obvious solution was to go offshore. There again, there lies an issue of permitting. So if we want the solution of increasing the percentage of renewables to come at a fast pace, we need to address the permitting issue. If we do not get fast permitting, then we're going to push the projects forward. As things stand, if we do have a fast permitting process, these projects will still take 3, 4, 5 years, perhaps even 6 years to materialize. So the importance of agility there is something which I think really needs to be pushed forward. We're also looking at a solution perhaps also at Commission level. But let us not underestimate the importance of acting in an agile manner. The last thing, and I will close off on this point, the importance of staying close to our people, keeping the support of people behind us, and that is what will really shape the future of Europe. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Antonio, you have been practically always leading your government and your country in turmoil, turbulent times, in times of real crisis, European, worldwide ones. I have to say that you did it successfully, because at the last elections he scored more than 40%, and I think this should be also acknowledged as an outstanding result. Yet again, today, we have said it, we are facing multiple challenges that finally result into a new economic crisis. How should Europe react to all of this?
Well, we have to learn from the previous crisis. We have done very bad 10 years ago on the financial crisis, when we left each member state in their own, and we built the policy driven by austerity. But we have done very well to face the COVID crisis, not only on the joint procurement of vaccines, but also because on this time we don't answer driven by austerity, but driven by solidarity. And we found a common answer for a symmetric crisis. And we can never forget that instruments like SURE or Next Generation save companies, save jobs, save wages, save people, save our Europe, was the best instruments against populism, and was instruments based on solidarity and social democratic values. We have been facing consecutive crises for the last 15 years. Financial crisis, climate crisis, pandemic crisis, now a war. That means we need a permanent stabilizing mechanism to face and to tackle this crisis. And on the time being, you need to accelerate the instruments that we have already. We have already Next Generation. We have already Repower EU. Then we need to accelerate to execute what we have already, but we need to create a permanent instrument, because what is the big lesson? The big lesson, they are always a crisis waiting for you. And then we need to have a permanent instrument to tackle this crisis.
Thank you, Antonio. And we touched upon this subject already before with Antonio and Pedro. Magdalena, what is your take on how we can ensure the continued commitment of our citizens to a sustainable future away from fossil energy?
I think just what Stefan Levin said, which is showing that this climate transition, green transition, is not about losing jobs. It's not about lower growth. It's not about a more boring life, but the opposite. The green transition is something that is right now creating jobs with good wages. It is creating investments, creating higher growth. And we see it in the northern part of Sweden right now. It's a fantastic development. So many people are moving there. They need to build their houses. They need to build schools. They need to build infrastructure because of all these investments. And this is what we have to show to our citizens, that this is not a boring future. It is a glorious future that is awaiting us. And this is the right thing to do, because we have to save the climate. This is a question of security policy, is very obvious to us right now, but this is also a question of jobs and growth for the future.
Dear Robert, we have seen in Europe growing political forces that are nationalist, that are populist, that are radical in that sense. your leadership and your party has shown in the course of many years that you have been always able to keep them at bay in your island. Does the international cooperation help to convince citizens to not fall into the nationalistic rhetoric?
Going back to the system which we have in Malta, it is mostly a bi-party system. So two major political parties are represented in parliament, but we do have a small number of parties who share the confidence of a small minority of our people. But during the last general election and in following polls, it has been noted that there is an increasing number of people who are perhaps doubtful of the two major political parties. And that is a sentiment which we really need to address. And how can we address the benefit of international cooperation in that formula? By delivering results. And I must admit that I do have a bit of a difficulty in explaining the benefits, so I'm fully convinced of the importance of international cooperation, but come the end of the coming week's council, the media will be asking me questions of what has been the outcome of that council and what benefit the measures which will be decided upon at this council will give to the Maltese people. And up till now, I still have no reply in that context. So I am optimistic, cautiously optimistic, that we will manage to come to a number of meaningful conclusions, but our people will ask us, mostly in the energy sector, has there been the application of the principle of solidarity when it comes to the energy sector, insofar as concerns the particular position of small island member states? Up till now, as we speak, the answer would be in the negative. I hope that in the coming days, I would be able to provide a different reply to our people. But in Malta, going back to how we tackled the rise of populist movements, particularly as regards the issue of migration, we have taken a very clear migration policy, which I think has worked out well. As regards the negative impacts of inflation and other financial pressures, which obviously give much room then to maneuver to populist movements. Obviously, populist movements have the advantage of being able to speak a lot and not being in the driving seat, because when you are in the driving seat, then things tend to change when you come face to face with reality. But there again, the success, I think the secret formula lies in keeping very close to what people are expecting of us, in treating them with respect, in understanding that, yes, people are suffering, and let us not underestimate the effects of 2.5 years of pressures related to the pandemic, be it solitude, be it having people confined in the space of their homes, not being able to go out to work, or not being able to shop. That was one particular type of pressure which also led to psychological issues other than financial issues. Now, people are faced with inflationary pressures which obviously are taking a pinch on their pockets. So, yes, let's keep this international dialogue moving forward, but then we also have to deliver important results. The last point, Antonio also mentioned it, in 2008, everyone pushed forward with an economic formula of austerity. It failed miserably. It gave rise to an increased unemployment rates, investment lessened, and we took literally years to recover from that recession. Now, as we move forward, I think the formula there has changed to one of incentivizing our businesses, to one of incentivizing our workers. Yes, I do appreciate what Pedro is saying, that a windfall tax would be one of the solutions on the excessive profits which energy companies are making. I would also advocate another formula. So yes, let's not exclude talk of a windfall tax, but also let's latch onto the financial muscle which these energy companies have. If we are to materialize our renewable projects, renewable energy projects, what we're doing in Malta is we're latching onto the investment of the private sector. There is no way on earth that our governments can inject the capital which is needed, the huge capital which is needed to make these investments. So I think it is a two-pronged approach. Yes, let's, if need be, tax on excessive profits, but also let's lock onto this financial muscle which these companies have registered to incentivize them to invest in renewables. More in renewables will mean much lower unit rates related to the production cost and distribution of electricity. So let's look at things holistically. Thank you.
Thank you. And the last question of this panel goes to you, Pedro. And I'm happy that your microphone is working today. You're a strong proponent of UN reform. As socialists, as internationalists, how can we lead the world through change?
Together with my dear friend Stefan, we belong to this group. The two main questions, apart from the climate change, in the General Assembly of the United Nations were, first, how do we allocate financial resources to the less developed countries after the pandemic and nowadays with these terrible consequences of the energy crisis? And the second was the food crisis. And I think that taking into consideration that we know what are the big problems, what we need is a much more effective multilateral system. I mean, of course, we tend to reform from 0 to 100 everything in a very short period of time. I think we have to be much more humble. We have to be much more intelligent and go step by step. That means, for instance, regarding this allocation of financial resources to the less developed countries, I think that we reached a very good agreement to allocate 20% of our SDRs through this new fund created under the umbrella of the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, which is this resilient fund, and Spain was the first country in the world to commit ourselves with this allocation of 20% of our SDRs in the fund. And regarding the international food crisis, I believe, as Antonio mentioned before, we need to support and back Antonio Guterres as Secretary General of the United Nations. I think it's important that we coordinate all the efforts that Europe or different countries all around the world are delivering or deploying together with United Nations. Second, I think it's important to avoid unilateral decisions to close our borders for trading grains or fertilizers. Third, we need to do our home. And finally, and this is the last work, I think it's important that we extend the agreement reached together between the Russians and the Ukrainian government regarding this, Black Sea initiative to export grain and fertilizers from Ukraine to the rest of the world. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Prime Ministers. It was an honor to have you on stage. Everyone is very proud of you and of your work.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Antonio.
Thank you.
Yeah, Robert.
Muchas gracias. I know. Sorry.
So that was wonderful to hear our Prime Ministers for being here today and all the work that they are doing. Building a Europe with strong progressive values, one that works for fairness, sustainability, and fights for democracy and freedom.
And we do believe in standing for freedom, standing for democracy, standing for international law, standing for fundamental rights. And this is why we stand with Ukraine. It's not only empty words, it's not only empty rhetorics. There are actions that we do, that we did as a party back in Brussels, actions of solidarity. We have been leading a delegation with Sergei a few months ago at the border between Poland and Ukraine to show our solidarity and our support to the people that were fleeing the conflict and also to those in Poland that were helping them, giving them shelter. We would like to take a stock at this of what has happened in the past months, in the past 8 months since the tragic invasion of Ukraine took place, by showing you this on a video.